This week we're back in Faneuil Hall and we're talking about the big shape. If you remember last week we had a day of painting the marketplace. We focused on a kiosk and a background building and talked about ways to get started with your subject, to simplify your subject and get it on the paper, and to use the graded washes to realize some of the big parts of the painting. Very important stuff, especially when you're working in an active, busy place like Faneuil Hall, is being able to catch something that's moving. Usually when we're doing plein air painting, we start with the inanimate objects and add the animated ones as we go along. And that's what I'm doing here. That's what we did last week. This week I'm going to be talking about shape. And when you're getting started, we talked about some strategies for getting started last week. One of them is to find the largest shape. And sometimes that means combining shapes of different objects. For example, a building and a canopy, or even the sidewalk in a building. If they're close in tonality, very often an artist will join them and make a single shape. So today's exercise is going to illustrate that. I'm using one color here after placing my drawing onto the paper. I'm using one color to give us a visual recognition of an overall shape. These shapes are composed of different objects, for example, a building on the left, the foreground, and a distant Quincy Market. The Faneuil Hall building in front of us with a tower that has the grasshopper on it. I don't know if I'll get to the grasshopper, but that's where it is. So look at this yellow ochre color that I'm using. It's a single color, but because of its similarity in tone, the building, the foreground, they have a similar appearance. I mean, they create one shape, and I'm going to keep that as a focus point as I build the rest of the painting. As I move into the second stage, where I'm adding color to the canopy and to the sky, these are light tones, and I'm going to follow that by adding some darker grays into the back of Faneuil Hall Market, Faneuil Hall, and into the Quincy Market building that's coming to my right. The Cheers restaurant is in front of me. In fact, that's their green canopy. So I'm isolating the canopy by using a the dark shape of Faneuil Hall behind it, and that darkness is going to be carried to the right and downward underneath the canopy. It's going to extend to the left side and up via some trees. And I'm going to try and keep the tonality close so that it's a joined shape and presents a positive, striking contrast to the bright sky and the canopy in front of us. Right now the colors I'm using are burnt sienna, a little bit of alizarin crimson, and ultramarine blue. This combination makes a really excellent gray that you can vary as you move through the painting. And what I mean by that is, towards the back I've used a little more blue, and as I come lower I'm going to be using more ultramarine blue and alizarin crimson, and as I come into the dappled sunlight I'll be using even more of that reddish crimson to give a forward feeling to the brickwork that's in front of me, and use some of that same bright red in figures that are passing through the scene. So part of my technique is to leave these little whites. What they represent could be, windows that are reflecting light, tabletops that are reflecting a bit of light. Sometimes it's the edge of a building that's catching a light. I leave them with the knowledge that I can go back at any time and add a color and change it very easily. I can even get rid of it if I don't like it. But I start that way because I like to have a lot of these little lights to help move the eye through the painting. Now what you see is I'm joining that big medium dark tone into the building on the left. What building it is, I couldn't tell you, but there's a lot of tall buildings down in this area, so we're using it to create a backdrop for this scene. And this little pathway is just an opening to the side where people can stroll through. Light is passing through. We'll put some dappled sunlight there as we get into the painting. Right now I'm working with a technique called dry into wet. This area I'm painting into is still quite wet. If you notice, the colors are kind of softening as I put them down and bleeding out a little bit. This is a great way to add depth to your shadows and create nuances in the dark parts of the painting. So the mixture I'm using is some neutral tint, which is like a black, mixed with ultramarine blue and sometimes alizarin crimson. Now you see me using that red gray to add some figures that are sitting under the canopy, maybe having a beer, enjoying the atmosphere, the nice light that's down in Faneuil Hall. And I continue to work on this area while it's still wet, taking advantage of the wetness in the paper so that these colors that I'm adding, they're soft and they blend in, they become mushy, but they still keep their form and they still have an impact on the painting. Now I'm extending that dark that I've been using to build up the right hand side, extending it to the left and joining it to the trees, which are growing along the center pathways in the Faneuil Hall marketplace. They give us a welcome shade on a day like today. It's pretty warm out, and they give a nice natural touch to an urban scene. I'm starting with the branches. Leaves will come later, so it looks like a fall scene now, or even maybe winter. But later we'll add some foliage.